Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the Hertie School. My name is Jessie Scott. I'm an adjunct professor here teaching project courses as a hobby alongside my work in climate and energy policy. I will be moderating part of this evening's event. We have an event with several lead speakers, so I hope we will have some important ideas, and then we will also take questions from the audience at the end. So please be thinking of questions as we go along. This is a joint event organized by the Stiftung KlimaWirtschaft and the Hertie School, and I'd like to open with just some words from the two institutions. First, from Sabine Nallinger, who is the managing director of the Stiftung, and then from Dr. Johannes Lindner, who is the co-director of the Jacques Delors Center here at the Hertie School. Following that, we will have a keynote from the State Secretary, and then the State Secretary and Dr. Hertie of Wacker Chemicals will have a panel discussion with me. And then, as I say, we will have an opportunity for questions. So, Sabine and Johannes, over to you first.
Yeah, thank you, Jessie, for your kind introduction. And first of all, I would welcome you very warmly here in the Hertie School to this very timely event. We at Stiftung KlimaWirtschaft bring together big German companies from all sectors of the economy, and we bring together the front runners to get climate neutral in economy and industry. I want to share three messages today with you. My first point is some insights from our trip to Brussels last week. I have been there with my team, and we have had a big conference in Brussels on priorities for the next 5 years in the European Union. One thing became clear in the discussion with all the companies who joined us, that business are driving now the climate agenda. What they are doing is they are setting climate targets, they are developing strategies, and they make billions of investments in climate neutral economy. So the most of the company, I would say, are now doing their job, but we now need the right political support to fully implement the European Green Deal. My second point is about the international competition and the role of the European Green Deal. So as I told you, I speak to a lot of companies in Brussels, and they are all a lot under pressure because there is a big competition from China and from the US. So the US has now put $370 billion on the table, and China is now dominating almost the new technology, the climate neutral technology like solar panels, batteries, electric cars, and so on. So the Green Deal can be our answer, but that means it needs to be developed further. So my third point is that has to happen now. Businesses, as I told you, are now part to reach climate neutrality. The European Green Deal has to get support that it will be afforded and it will come to the Green Deal. So therefore it's important that we now implement the European Green Deal and to develop it. So the Green Deal to deliver good jobs and prosperity for Europe. So thank you so much, dear Sven Giegold and dear Christian Hertie, for being here with us. You are the ideal panelists for the discussion today. And thank you so much, Johannes, for the collaboration. You and the Jacques Delors Center, we both together organized this panel and this event today. And I'm very happy to have you all here. And now I hand over to you, Johannes.
Very good. No, thank you very much, Sabine. I fully agree with you. It's great panel. I think a very good topic, and it's super nice to have you all here at Hertie. Second organizers, also 3 points. That'd be very, very quick, but I wanted to also kind of put 3 points to the panelists and 3 questions that I think we should ideally tackle. And it very much follows from what you said, Sabine. I feel very much, first point, I feel very much reminded of 2019. And you may remember the election at the time turned out to be less populist than we thought, a new parliament and a new commission, and the Green Deal as one of the cornerstones of that new commission. Now, if we look back at these 5 years, I think it's fair to say that we've achieved, or they have achieved a lot, and that we've really set up a new regulatory framework. So we're now in a new phase. And this phase is a lot about implementation. And I think one of the key questions that ideally we also tackle today is what are the new instruments that are needed and what is the role of the EU in that? The second point is, I think we are in different circumstances than in 2019. We have an election campaign that is still to be really started, but that focuses on a lot of other priorities. So be it security, migration, economic performance. So the key question is how do, in a way, the Green Deal, the green policies interact with these new priorities? Can we integrate them? You hinted at that. Competitiveness and Green Deal there can go together. Or are they trade-offs? And do we not need to be also honest about the trade-offs between these different priorities? Mind you, just one little comment, and it corroborates with some of the research that Niels and others have done. I think we have the tendency to idealize the 2019 consensus around climate. But I think we are also too gloomy at times about what the current appetite and the current support on climate is. And you look at the Eurobarometer between 2019 and now. In fact, in both surveys, it's climate on place 4. Now, of course, different countries, probably different intensity, but it's interesting, and as I said, our own research has collaborated this, that it's actually not as gloomy as sometimes is presented. And the temptation to say, okay, we need to look at something else than climate is sometimes pursued too readily by some parties, I would say. Final point, we know that the Green Deal will mean a lot of green investment, and that can be done privately, but also publicly. And we also know if we leave it only to the national money, that may actually mean that some member states with less fiscal space, with less means, will possibly not do the green investments that we want them to do. And if we think about green subsidies, that there may be a risk of fragmentation in the single market. Now, Next Generation EU was an important complement of the Green Deal, but it ends in 2026. So the key question is, what comes next? And we know the debate on a new EU budget will be extremely difficult. So one of the key questions that we need to see is what in this next phase of the Green Deal, how can we manage the distributive conflict that comes with it? And with these 3 points, I'm very happy to now listen to you and to hand over back to Jesse. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. State Secretary. The stage is yours.
So, yeah, thank you indeed for the invitation, and great to make progress towards using the first Christian name between members of the foundation, between us, and we have, I've already helped a bit here. I find it always silly if Germans use first names in English and second names in German, and if they switch between the two, they combine usually first and second names and confuse everybody. Also, thank you for your additional questions, Johannes, and as always, in the end, a EU finance guy always ends up with EU finance questions, linking it, sneaking it into any other debate you may find. And I will try to avoid it as good as I can. So thanks for the foundation to host this event, and I can only mirror that when I was lead candidate in 2019 for the European elections, in a totally different public atmosphere, mass demonstrations globally, but in particular in Europe around the issue of climate, and then the Green Deal was born out of that movement. and by the response of EU citizens to that movement, we have really achieved a great deal. And to me, the first message here is not so much one about the climate, but what we have had so many academic and populist discussions, both about the non-functioning of EU democracy. And the last election has proven everyone wrong. So if EU citizens want something, and they are supported by many businesses, by many people in civil society and academia on the basis of climate research, EU is changing course and delivering, even with our complicated institutions. So to put it bluntly, Sharp is wrong. He's wrong. EU democracy works much better than the most brilliant research from Max Planck Institute has written so much about. And also the cynics about European democracy have been proven wrong. And also the cynics over whether it's worth going to the streets, making your point. You can deliver in incredibly short period of time, even in controversial areas of policy. And we have now a legally binding framework for the 2030 target or in climate, and also a long-term goal of climate neutrality by 2050. And therefore, with the Fit for 55 package, we underpin the 2030 target with legislation across the entire economy. It will drive the transition in all its member states and all sectors with a very German idea at its heart, emission trading, and not only in 40% of emissions, as we had it already before, a bit less than 40% with industry and energy production, but also now including transport and housing. And this means about 80% of the EU emissions are now covered, which is not so important by a trading mechanism, but by a binding cap, which is self-enforcing irrespectively of new needed political discussions. And this is, of course, only acceptable with a new EU-wide fund, which is helping those most in need to cope with the potential of increasing prices. And as I would like to stress, this was groundbreaking because for the first time ever, an EU common market legal base was complemented by an instrument on the same legal basis in majority voting to vote for a social compensation. So this again proves a lot of academic writers and cynics wrong, that there is no social functioning dimension of the EU. No, if we use common market legislation, and the common market legislation has potential negative social consequences, we can use that legal base to compensate the most in need. And also this is groundbreaking in the Fit for 55 deal. And then we moved on, and as you were rightly saying, this package covering all major sectors of emissions with European legislation, we have now moved on. We're starting with the Net Zero Industry Act in order to make sure that we not only have binding legislation to reduce emissions and getting more efficiency, but also to gain the economic advantages. And all this is not only a legally binding theoretical concept, but it's already paying off. So we had now 44% of electricity based on renewables in May 2023. That was the first time on that level. And we have produced then more electricity from wind and solar than from fossil fuels. And just now, basically, we also, for the first time, had more production of electricity from renewables than from nuclear. And solar energy is soaring all over the EU, with more than 50 gigawatt installed last year alone, 14 of this in Germany. And we have at the moment seen doubling of new investment every 2 years. And for wind power, we have assisted massively deployment, and also this is now paying off with easier permitting and less red tape when it comes to wind investment. And the same we have also done to grids. And this is bitterly needed, but the whole energy transition can only work with a functioning grid system, ideally European integrated, to reduce even further costs. 2.6 million heat pumps were installed across the 14 largest EU markets. This is confusing because lots of social media says they don't work, they are all expensive, and which is of course a lot of fake news. So they are working and they are expanding massively. And then we also see that at the moment, and you pointed to this, Johannes, we are faced with more historic challenges. While climate change is getting worse and accelerating, we are faced at the same time with geopolitical conflicts, which and tougher and tougher competition, unfair competition also, in particular from China. And therefore, we have both challenges at the same time. And in particular, global competition is intensifying also in the area of clean tech. And it's also based on different input factors of production, of which, of course, energy and energy costs is one of them. And therefore, it is now, for the next step of the Green Deal, so crucial that we make sure that Europe profits from this turnaround also in an economic sense. So what is therefore next from our perspective in the Green Deal? So let me first start with saying the Green Deal is not finished yet. It will need to continue to be a key priority for the EU and its member states. We cannot give in to fear-driven voices. This would not only harm our climate, but also severely hit our economy. Instead, we must seize the business opportunities in the Green Deal and work to enhance them even further. So first, we need to implement what we have agreed. And yes, the targets are ambitious. Some of these sub-targets are really ambitious, and we will perhaps speak about this. But they are not a walk in the park. There is now, therefore, implementation and enforcement. And for this, it is needed that the Commission takes its job seriously. It is worrying that some diversions from targets so far have not led to opening of infringement procedures. Furthermore, this coincides that we need to develop further with the Commission analysis that a large part of the 90% 2050 climate target could be achieved by existing legislation, by implementing this seriously. It is imperative that we protect our achievements, realize the opportunities, and not send further confusing signals to businesses and the public on the course of the green transition. I stress this so much because we have a certain contradiction in the public debate. Some important actors on Sunday, they are saying European investment climate needs regulatory stability. On Monday, the same people start in Berlin to say, no, we need to weaken the Green Deal here, and please open that legislation, and perhaps the combustion engine is still the most efficient thing where Germany has ever invented. And that is not coherent. So we need stability of expectations. This means also for us that we will not suggest to radicalize or reopen some of the deals we have now made. But on the other side, there should be the same consistency. Second, we need to dissolve the false alternatives of cutting red tape and ensuring high levels of standards, in particular in the Green Deal. Yes, we need to design and implement legislation in a lean way with as little bureaucracy as possible. Planning procedures need to be further accelerated especially for strategic Green Deal technologies such as renewables, grids, European infrastructure, and so on, but also beyond. But at the same time, we should not back down and lower our already decided standards of the Green Deal. Third, we need to make sure that we secure our strong and innovative industrial base in Europe. It has become apparent that Europe needs its own genuine industrial policy. We are aware of the struggles of industry related to our unfair international competition and also use of subsidies. I strongly believe that this is not only a government position, that we must be prepared to take new steps in this situation. So, for instance, we suggest that there needs to be a new competition instrument which looks into, uses competition policy in areas where effective market competition is absent, where new startup companies are driven out of the market by dominant global players, and focusing these new competition instruments in markets where we have a strong global domination of global companies from outside. Of course, we support open markets, but especially in areas where Europe has a strong industrial base, we should set strong pioneering ecological and social standards. This will both support our industry and strengthen the Green Deal agenda. One piece of legislation which will be voted finally in the European Parliament this week is the European Sustainable Products Regulation, a horribly boring title for something which is truly great, because it means, I don't know who invents these titles always in Europe, but that's another problem Delors could tackle. But the point is, this means for different category of products to define rules which make recycling and reuse easier, to ensure that they are energy efficient, and by setting such standards in Europe, it can help our industry to retain and rebuild a first mover advantage. And these standards should be used in order to deepen the common market and use the common market in order to green our sectoral products. Fourth, we must move forward on financing of the transition. Johannes, this is for you, was already in the speech. Studies show the massive investments needed, but also the big rewards in terms of money saved on energy imports, industrial growth, new jobs, and lower energy bills for households. Not to mention the high costs of inaction highlighted by the recent EU climate risk report. So we must find a way, and we need to do it together as Europe. Private capital will play a key role in financing the transition. We must therefore do anything we can to attract and not to hinder private investment, which are urgently needed to make the transition a success. And for this, we need the right framework conditions and well-targeted public funding. I have to say that we join forces with the Chancellery, but also with the German government as a whole, to make sure that the European Capital Markets Union is not seen as a buzzword, and then when you need to deliver on the elements, there is always a strong resistance, and we need to deliver on all the different elements so that capital markets in Europe integrate. And this is a great opportunity for startups and all actors which are in need of equity all over the Union. The negotiations of the EU's next multilateral financial framework post-2027 will not be easy, as Johannes predicted. We cannot preempt these negotiations, but we must ensure that the limited EU funds are employed with maximum effect to best support the transition. While this is not a government position yet, we believe that in the next MFF, it must be accompanied by further own financial resources, ideally linked to the goals and instruments of the Green Deal. And let me go even further with something which is not yet government position. As you perhaps know, the OECD tax deal, the Pillar 1, is not in agreement yet. So at the moment, it doesn't look as if taxing digital companies and sharing the profit base fairly between member states would deliver quick results. And therefore, the old idea already suggested by Juncker to say, let's tax a fair share of these global profits in Europe and use this as a genuine own resources. So taxing the profits of large digital companies which exert excessive market power anyway in the common market. This is an idea for which we had an international deal. But if this deal is not, we stand by that deal. But if this deal is not delivered, Europe is free to come back to its original proposal and implement it. Furthermore, the role of the European Investment Bank needs to be strengthened to harness its full potential to transition support. This means building on the ambitious steps it has already taken or initiated over the past years with the EIB Climate Bank roadmap and forging ahead to address critical gaps. For example, to support joint European infrastructure for net zero, new cutting-edge clean technologies, or investment and adaptation measures, but equally in defense. Fifth, we need to shape the next phase of the transition as we get closer to climate neutrality. A new interim 2040 climate target in line with the 1.5 degrees pathway will be an important cornerstone for this. It will ensure planning security, attract clean investment in the EU, and also be a signal to international partners that the EU continues with its transition. Based on that target, we will then need a Fit for Near Zero package building on Fit for 55. It must again be a package covering all sectors, getting all sectors ready for climate neutrality. For Germany, it is clear that it must also include targets for renewables and energy efficiency, as these will do the heavy lifting of greenhouse gas reductions. But on the way to this, the first priority of the next Commission, as everybody knows, will be about investment, economic competitiveness, and and therefore delivering on getting out the economic potential out of the existing legislation. The package must also tackle the environmentally sound ramp-up of negative emissions, ensure national responsibility, and consider social aspects. Finally, we also need to further develop the other areas of the Green Deal which are not yet covered. We especially need to create a business case for farming in line with biodiversity objectives and creating a toxic-free environment. There are economic opportunities in this area which are currently not enough exploited. So let me conclude that we achieved a great deal, and European citizens after 2019 got what they called for. European democracy is working. We have to confront the cynics and those who claim Europe is not functioning. If citizens want something from European democracy, they go to the streets, they go to the ballot box, it works, and we have delivered. And let's now make sure that we move from climate legislation to climate business opportunities and realizing the economic prosperity dimension of the Green Deal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're opting for first names here since we're speaking English tonight. Christian, would you like to join us on the stage, please? Everyone, we've had some very interesting opening remarks. Let me take Johannes's point that this in some ways resembles 2019 when we last had European Parliament elections, and in some ways some things have changed. One of the things that's changed, I think, or at least compared to maybe 10 years ago, is we all now know it's not a walk in the park to deliver a green economy. I think there was a moment when perhaps some politicians, some businesses adopted pledges and targets without fully understanding the depth of the effort that would be required. And that depth of effort, as we've heard, is very, very broad. We've had tax instruments mentioned. I'm always delighted when tax is mentioned, because if you have a policy discussion without discussing tax, you're leaving out the biggest tool in the kit. Capital Markets Union, the importance of actually completing aspects of the European project if we're going to be able to deliver some of the investments that will deliver the Green Deal. I think there's a theme here about whether we are gloomy about the politics or actually there is some optimism about politics. All of that brings us to Sabina's opening remark about the role of businesses driving the agenda, and ultimately, how can I put this, the real engineering that has to underpin the green economy, sustainable products. So Christian, you've listened to these various remarks. I look at you, thinking of sustainable products. You lead a company which has been around for 110 years, if I'm correct, which has a net zero 2045 target and some quite stiff targets for 2030. How are you doing? And is the EU Green Deal helping? And is it helping enough?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jesse. A bunch of interesting questions. Maybe before I start, let me make some general statements just to, that everybody knows where I stand. And, because I'm, you could say I'm part of the good guys and part of the bad guys at the same time, as I'm from the chemical industry. So chemical industry is very energy intensive. That's a very intrinsic problem, you can call, because we manufacture molecules. We put them together and form new ones, and that is just the energy which is in the chemical bond. So it's not because we are inefficient, we are very efficient, but it's thermodynamics. So, but okay, don't talk about these topics too much. So, I'm sitting here as the CEO of a chemical company. I'm sitting here as an entrepreneur. So that means we want to make money, we want to be innovative, we want to be very creative in the way we do business, and we love doing it on our own. So we don't need politicians all the time. Sometimes, and I think if you talk about a transformation, I do see a necessity for the support from politics. But just to make that clear, I'm absolutely fine doing business with my people on my own, being creative, looking for new stuff. I'm also not the biggest fan of regulation and legislation, because sometimes that hinders creativity and competitiveness in on a global scale. Second statement, I'm very pro-European. Just want to say that, in case somebody has a different view on that. But I think we all agree in that room on that. And the third thing I would like to say is, we as Wacker, but I can say the same thing for the chemical industry, at least in Germany, where I'm part of the VCI, we are all absolutely committed to this transformation. So there should be no doubt about industry, especially in Germany, but also in Europe. I think it's a clear statement. A lot of companies are very committed. You mentioned we have clear targets on neutrality, 45. We have targets 2030 for reducing CO2 emissions by 50% based on 2020. We have science-based targets validating our targets. We just had recently a report from the Carbon Disclosure Project, where we got the best mark on our climate activities. So we are very focused on that. We have a very clear plan, and that was coming back to your question, very clear plan what to do. But I would like to make the statement, this is not for free, and it's not easy. One of the examples would be energy. So energy plays a vital role in that whole transformation equation, and energy in the form, obviously, as green energy, because otherwise, it doesn't make sense. But we also need it at a competitive pricing. And that's really the challenge we face at the moment. And maybe that we will have that at a later question again. But I think in that case, it shows that it's not only legislation that helps or regulation, because if energy is 3 times as expensive as in other parts of the world, you have a problem.
Well, let's pick up that question then about the cost of energy, the competitiveness implications. There's a lot of work around at the moment from the European Roundtable of Industry, people who are putting inputs to the Draghi report, remarks from the European Central Bank, all saying that one of the big challenges is grids and massive investments. Essentially a doubling of the pace of grid investments to 2030 is needed. You said climate finance always comes up as a question, and it does. How are we going to afford those investments which will help us to bring down the cost of energy by enabling us to really use the renewable resources we have, and also to electrify energy loads, which we've been a bit less successful at so far in Europe? Can we do it on existing private investment? Can we do it on the rate base? Or are we also talking about public finance?
Look, you sneaked in several questions. Let me start with energy pricing and the grids. So first, let us remind that energy pricing, which we had in the past, was not priced according to the true price of energy. So we had imports from Russia. We had imports of coal from Russia and elsewhere, and future generations paid the price. So we didn't have fair energy pricing at the start. Also, some of our competing countries are using massively energy which is not priced according to the true value of it, but it's basically a huge implicit climate subsidy in the respective energy pricing. Our problem now is that we are now, by requiring transition, internalizing a part of that cost while others don't. So, and for this, after long resistance, we also Germany was at the outside rather skeptical. We accepted for some critical areas the CBAM regulation, which makes up for some of that difference, even if the way how it's at the moment implemented by the European Commission is not a good example of cutting red tape, to say that, and probably we agree that this is but the idea is the right one, to say when we cannot have pricing globally, but we do it in Europe, then we have to make some border adjustments. Secondly, we can achieve the transition much more cheaply if we do it in a European way. So the European Energy Union is critical in order to reduce the cost of the transition. The political problem, which is my problem, every Energy Council, is that unfortunately not all member states agree fully how to achieve it. It would be all much easier if we would all agree how to construct it. But some member states, in particular one large and by myself very much loved neighbor on the other side of the Rhine, believes that we keep a more centralized backbone, while we believe in a fully flexible, fully decentralized method of energy production. And then you have to connect these two systems with one grid and one planning approach. This is very difficult and constrains what we can deliver. But there are things which we can deliver. So we work with the French at the moment on a flexibility strategy, which is absolutely critical. So if demand and supply exert the flexibility reserves, this will be by connecting the price signal to the demand. This will help everybody who is less flexible to achieve the whole deal at a cheaper price. We know that all actors can be flexible. Some industrial production methods need a stability. Others may have flexibility reserves. But we need to shift as much demand as possible into the hours when energy is now has a marginal cost near zero, in order to gain space for those who can't. And this is more effective the more networked we are. And that is what we build on. And there, our French partners, nos amis à Paris, they agree with us on this. And this is something where I see a priority for the next Commission to deliver. So a full flexibility. Second, grids. And I said it in my speech, that we have a European Investment Bank, which in reality is much less European than the title. I don't know who has coined that title. It is not European. It's basically using a European AAA for refinancing national projects. There's very little European in the EIB. So what they finance basically with this financing advantage between the European AAA and the national rating, they finance national public projects. What we believe is the EIB should concentrate on European public goods. So they, including the grid, but also financing defense efforts where support from them is needed. So the EIB will need to deliver much more. And lastly, the next European budget, we will not be able to print money for the next EU budget. And that means more parts of that budget will have to fulfill several functions with the same euro. So when we use cohesion spending, this can be a huge budget for the Green Deal, as was Next Generation EU. Cohesion, to regain its legitimacy, has to be focused on digital and green transition. And equally, the greening of agricultural budgets will be needed in order to also leverage on that budget for achieving other dimensions of the Green Deal. So multiple use of the key budget elements will be key in order to answer some of these financing challenges. Beyond that, as a federalist, I would love to have easier answers, and we can agree on this, but in between, we have to say openly, there is a 27 member states consensus, which we cannot so easily do away with. So for this, citizens will have to go to the streets in the end again. So also in Germany, it was very difficult to get to a strong federal budget. As you know, German history, it was not so easy. It will not be easy in Europe either.
I hope there's a lot of candid answers there that are helpful to you. You have operations around the world. How would you compare the kind of conversations you could have about the role of policy as well as the role of getting on with business in Europe here compared to the conversations you have in the US and Asia?
Well, I mean, if you put it in a pretty blunt way, you could say that in Europe we talk a lot about legislation and regulation to solve the climate change, the challenges, the transformation, whereas specifically in the US, you talk more about what's the business case. Nobody talks about what's the regulation necessary for that. Nobody talks about legislation about that. And I think that's something I personally believe we also need to come to that in Europe. And for me, the promising signal would be the what has been announced just recently with this Antwerp declaration by Ursula von der Leyen in context of talking about an industrial deal. And don't get me wrong, it's not about, do we have to choose now? Is it either or? No, it's not. I think we definitely need to integrate the ideas of the Green Deal that you also, advocated for, but we need to combine it more with an industrial deal to make it at the end of the day, to make it a business case, and to bring the entrepreneurial spirit into that game. Because I believe in these targets. I don't share to 100% your optimism on what we've achieved, because just by setting targets, that's not half the bill, right? I mean, setting targets is maybe 10% of the bill. It's important, and you need to give the guidance to the people, definitely. That's also what I do as a CEO. But I think it only makes a successful case at the end of the day if people achieve it. And therefore, it needs to be achievable, and you need to look at what are the cornerstones, what are the framework, what is necessary for that. And I come back to just one point again. For me, it's all about the power of electricity, of green electricity. That's the decisive factor whether Europe will make the case and be the front runner or the others take over. I see a little risk in that the others take over because of a more pragmatic approach to it. And I think what we now need, and I mean, we had a great discussion last year, especially, I mean, with the BMW UK on the industrial power price, which in my view would have been such an idea of saying, come on, we fuel that transformation by providing a power price for a couple of years until we have enough, competitive priced cheap power. So it didn't come, unfortunately. We still advocate for that because I still think it's a great business case for Europe. And you need electricity for everything. Also, if you talk about, these so-called modern industries, if you talk about AI, think about AI without electricity, it doesn't work. You need more electricity for that. So the more electricity you provide as a region, green and competitively priced, the more business I guarantee you. And I think, and that's all. That is for me, the super simple but convincing business case. And you worked on it, I know, and we supported that strongly. Unfortunately, it did not fly. I'm not. I'm still fighting for that or something similar, because if we all agree on the targets, and if we all agree on that scenario, and everything is great in 2050, so I think we just need to take the necessary decisions now. And maybe just a few comments on that grid. We just need a grid. Without a grid structure, it doesn't work at all. And yes, we need more interlinks between Europe. Nobody said that we have to do everything on our own in Germany. It wouldn't work. So utilize this whole grid system within Europe. Use the different forms of energy that are produced. Some more stable, some more fluctuating. The pricing model you've referred to, I think, is absolutely the right thing to do. There will be hours where electricity is super cheap, and then we need smart systems that take that electricity, you charge your cars, makes cars more attractive. So in theory, it's all clear. But I think we need now, and that would be my wish from politics, more a framework that tells me, there's security of supply for green energy at a competitive price for the next 10 years that I can make a case on. And that's what we don't have so far.
Yeah, there's a lot I basically agree with. As there are leading environmental lobbyists here in the room, I have to say that it's a bit dangerous, but I'm a fan of the Antwerp Declaration, and I made the initiative to invite all the signatories to our ministry to discuss with you what needs Europe next. And we agree also with the idea that there needs to be, and you heard it, an industrial deal next. And what's so interesting about the Antwerp Declaration is that basically European industries, and now lots of CEOs, and as you saw, signed on, signed, we do not want industrial policy as a value only as an idea in itself, but to realize the Green Deal, not to be against it, as some here in public debate suggest, but in order to realize it. And that is basically the offer you make. And we read with care what you wrote. There are some nitty-gritty details I would not love, yeah. So you will never find me as a fan of nuclear energy. I will not co-sign, and it's an old battle, it's done. C'est fini, le nucléaire pour nous. Aber gut, ja. Okay, but in the principal ideas we agree. We will. I've also suggested in the last council on competitiveness to invite the initiator to the council. So it was us as Greens inviting you guys to the European Council meeting. So this is because I think that's a constructive offer made. Second, when it comes to targets only, this is I think a deep misunderstanding of the Green Deal, because the Green Deal is not only about targets. It has sectorial legislation, and the sectorial legislation adds up to that target. And there's so much more in this legislation. What frustrates me sometimes a bit is that we never discuss the substance of these groundbreaking laws. So, for instance, on housing, we will now have in the future an obligation to install PV systems all over Europe, with new buildings, but also existing buildings. When it comes to cars, we also have binding legislation which will reduce CO2 emissions and in the end, end to the end of the combustion engine in private cars. The same applies to energy efficiency in houses, but also beyond. So basically, it is not only climate targets, it is practical legislation which is legally binding, including the build-up of renewables everywhere in Europe. So therefore, please, as a coordinator of the Green Deal negotiation for the government, I feel a bit hurt being said, you guy, you only deliver targets. No, we delivered sectorial legislation, legally binding everywhere. And that is what is so important about the Green Deal. Let me finish, and then on your cheap power. You deserve a response, and it's all very serious what you are saying. I think I agree with you that our energy costs are a problem, in particular for energy-intensive industry, and we were on the same side. And I was very much surprised to learn that this was seen as an unjustified subsidy up to the Chancellor, which I found very doubtful. The economic case for that claim was very doubtful. So therefore, the open question, does it still need public money? And I would say, we have innovative tools which we are rolling out, in particular the contracts for difference, which basically follow the following idea. We do not give blunt subsidies, but with the contracts for difference, we basically guarantee that the bet of companies for certain green markets will turn out positively. If it turns out positively, the state will get something back. If the price will not turn out well for these green markets, the state will sneak in money. And that is a fair deal between state and private investors, giving investment stability to these future green markets, while at the same time, if the whole business case goes well, private companies will have to give something back from the subsidies or support they've received. That logic is a fair deal, and we will need it in more sectors than where we have used it so far. But I would say, therefore, yes, the original problem, which we tried to tackle with the industrial power price, is not solved, and it's still an open issue. And even if the prices came down to a certain extent, they are not yet on a competitive level for all relevant players in our economy.
Yeah, and that's it. And just to comment on your last sentence, and I think that's really, in my case, the missed opportunity for our country and for our region, because I believe in the targets we have on building renewable power. The permitting got much easier. So I think it will be much faster. The bottleneck is now the grid, but also the grid guys tell me, also the permitting is getting much better. So there will be a good time in the 30s with the availability of green power competitively priced. But the problem is you want to achieve it, right? You want to still be around with your company at that time. And that was the idea behind this bridging power price or Brückenstrompreis. Yeah, okay, so we have to look on that. Maybe one comment you said on the Green Deal and just on targets. For me, legislation is something that can help. Honestly speaking, I think we talk within Europe much too much about legislation and, let me say it in my simple words, forbidding something instead of incentivizing something. And I give you the example, and maybe it's not a good example, but if you talk about this heat pump discussion, very lengthy discussion, not always fair. Imagine the government would have proposed saying, from now on, industry power price or green power price would be 5 cents for everybody per kilowatt hour. You could have skipped the whole discussion about heat pumps because everybody who can calculate would have bought a heat pump. No legislation at all necessary. Again, it might not be the best example, but I think you can tackle the problem from two sides. Either you make an incentive that everybody says, okay, it's an interesting thing. Power is cheap, so I buy a heat pump and get rid of my gas-fired thing in the cellar. Or you say the gas-fired thing will be forbidden, get something new. I think it's much more complicated. It's much more difficult to convince people. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's cheaper. So therefore, I think, and that's a fundamental thing. And coming back to your question, what's the difference between the US or other regions and Europe? Europe very much focused, I have to say, on this is not allowed anymore. You cannot do this anymore. We hate what you do here. And in other areas, other countries, they do it differently and sometimes have the same positive effect out of it. And therefore, I would be delighted if we could also have a more discussion also on this kind of positive incentive schemes.
Yeah, I see the following situation here. So if you compare, and I think it's a worthwhile endeavor to compare US and EU in this regard. You started with this logic. I think we have to accept that the European Treaty make Europe strong when it comes to rules and weak when it comes to money. Johannes and me, I already made some jokes about it. We suffer from the same problem. Basically, I would love to have a fiscal union, but we don't have it. We have a common market with common legislation for this common market. That's where Europe is strong, where the Brussels effect works. If Europe sets the standards, it has a good chance of becoming an international standard. That's the famous Brussels effect. Europe will not be a leader in provision of intelligent money, not even for industry. So that's unfortunate because we cannot solve the problem that it's easy to talk about expenditure, but you have to also earn the income. And there Europe is bloody weak. And that means in the US, it's the other way around. Because of the toxic climate, you cannot win anything on regulation because this is always seen as over-regulation and so on. But you can convince a majority in Congress when it's about tax cuts. So therefore, Biden, he made a great move. He connected all sorts of public policy projects, not only environment, by the way, minimum wages, minimum taxation, all sorts of environmental regulation, all connected to a tax credit because he could never have won any of those regulatory things. Is this the most effective way and the cheapest way to achieve certain of these objectives? I'm not so sure, because this will be a huge cost to the US taxpayer, because they want to avoid any regulation and only get it through tax subsidies. And it's not less bureaucratic, by the way. We talk to companies now applying for these subsidies in the US. They complain to us it's a highly bureaucratic approval procedure. So therefore, long story short, what seems to look so different as you claimed, in reality, if you look at more closely, the two are much more similar, only the sales method is different. So, and this is because of the institutional framework. And the last sentence on this is, I'm so lucky that we now agree on the same objective, but we have to sell it in different ways. Europe does common market legislation, Biden does taxation. In the end, it both has fiscal and regulatory consequences. They are only sold in different ways. That will be my thesis.
I'm loving this very active, detailed dialogue between business and green politics, and that's a huge step on from where we used to be, frankly. There's a lot of mutual knowledge, there's a lot of mutual focus on how, not if, but how to do this. Let me pick up while we're looking at Europe and sort of institutional strengths and weaknesses. The suggestion, if there was a single cheap electricity price, anybody who can do the maths would move to electrifying energy loads, including through household heat pumps. The person we don't have on this stage is somebody from DG Energy of the European Commission, really committed to the single energy market and to the particular ethos of the electricity market for consumers that we have had in Brussels. Are there some changes we need to make in Brussels if we're to be able to have that kind of very incentive-based, radical, practical discussion? Because we've had a European framework which has been designed to use existing assets rather than make new investments.
Well,
bluntly.
the main thing which we won, by the way, often not by full support of the Commission, it was this radical easing of permitting for new grids and renewables. This was a fight I led for more than a year in the Council. We didn't make lots of friends in the Environmental Council, but it was really necessary to achieve the big renewable change. What we need, we talked about the stronger integration of the grids and getting more flexibility out of the system. And there, the next European Commission has to more. But of course, we have now to use also what we made in Europe. So the permitting rules, they have been improved. But I pledge also to you, as Wacker, I think, works a lot in southern Germany. So the energy transition can only work and limit the costs of it if we have wind north and south and solar north and south. But it's the sad truth that several, mainly south of the Main states of Germany, are not very helpful to deliver their part in wind energy. And it's, to me, a huge political problem. Where I come from northern Germany, and we pay additional fees because we are too successful in wind, while at the same time others are still blocking with all sorts of localism arguments the necessary build-up of wind energy in southern Germany. We see similar resistance in other parts of Europe, but we need the power of business in order to get the permits really done, not only in northern and eastern Germany, but also in southern Germany.
Christian, a short one.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with you. Couldn't agree more with you. And our company is based in we have the biggest Bavarian chemical company, but it's not government based. It's it's a free company. So yes,
I always hope the government in Bavaria would be business based, but I was.
We always talk to all our stakeholders, and that's all the governments all around. That's in Bavaria, that's in Saxonia, But that's, of course, here on the federal level and also on the European level. No, but yes, we need, I mean, obviously we empower this. And we just recently had a very strong discussion on a local onshore wind park, which would have been the biggest in Bavaria, which actually we promoted. And well, I have to see how it works. I'm still missing the full 100% support from from the local government, but we are improving. But maybe to make a comment on that, I think this idea of having a different grid system or different grid tariffs is not a good idea. And what you refer to today is more the distribution grid fee, which is not a huge aspect of the overall grid fee. But at least in the transmission grid, what we would need definitely a single priced grid fee, because otherwise it would be disastrous for both ways. It would be disastrous for the industry in the south because energy pricing would be higher. And it would be disastrous for the guys that invest into offshore wind farms in the north because then the power would be cheaper. So I think this idea of having a divided power zone for electricity in Germany is a stupid idea.
I'm going to thank...
No, I'm not saying that you support it. I'm just saying it's a stupid idea.
We fight it. We fight it.
Okay.
We fight it with you,
Yeah.
but we cannot win that debate in Brussels if the fucking windmills are not installed in southern Germany. If they are not installed, we will lose this in Brussels. That's
On which-
the situation.
Got it.
I'm going to interrupt this fantastic conversation because what we have here is a detailed, knowledgeable, humorous, mutually understanding, practical discussion. This is what we have needed for years if we are actually to deliver the Green Deal. This is fantastic. I strongly recommend that the Stiftung and Hertie have a take-two version of this conversation in 6 months or a year. But meanwhile, I'd like to take some questions from the audience for our panelists. I'm going to take the questions in clumps of 3 just for efficiency. The young lady in maroon there, the gentleman at the back, and one over here.
Thank you so much for this discussion. Sophie Ponchlinger from Europe Jacques Delors, which is the think tank sister in Brussels, working on sustainability issues. One comment is that, and I need to remind it here because it's been not very clear, I felt on the panel, that the Commission often just is very, very prudent, especially lately on the Green Deal, because obviously they will only propose whatever goes through the Council. And at the current situation, it's quite difficult. So it's quite easy to hit on the Commission, but they are being quite prudent, I think. And I feel like it's easier to say that in Berlin than in Brussels. I have 3 questions. The first one is...
Perhaps just one question.
Yeah, just one. No. The first one was on agri-food because it's a huge issue with the farmers' protest and what the German government is going to do on the CAP reform and whether, it will try to kind of change it and align it with the Green Deal. The first thing is also, and that's maybe the main question, returning to the first one, on how the German government is going to support the competitive sustainability agenda, knowing that we have a debt brake and that the FDP is never going to accept that. Okay. I'm kind of wondering how, Germany is going to support that agenda going forward, because it feels like squaring the circle a little bit, trying to kind of have less money, but at the same time having an industrial policy.
Thank you. Sorry. Let me take those because we have a lot of hands up. So I'm trying to be a little fair here. At the back.
Maybe I cover one of the questions. My name is Anna Lietz. I'm working at Brunswick Group, and I used to be a member of the European Parliament. I would like to know, as Wacker is one of the strongholds on keeping photovoltaic in Europe, where do we stand and where do you perceive, or where you both perceive us as we fought leaving the dependency on gas and now building up capacity on green energy, as this was mentioned the whole evening. How do we do this if we are dependent particularly on China? And how do we build up capacity inside Europe? And where do you both see the Europe went over the last years, and how do we have to move to actually make this happen in the upcoming term? Thank you.
Okay, and one more in the current set. If I could have a microphone over here. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Wolfgang Oehls. I work for Ecosia, the biggest European search engine. We spend all of our surplus on climate action. Both of you talked about a lack of legislation, lack of money, and I think there's one area where the money is there, where the legislation is there, and that's public procurement. I think we spent 500 billion euros in Germany alone on public procurement. The Bundesrechnungshof audited the German government a couple of years ago and found out that every second purchasing decision was violating existing law and spending existing money, violating environmental aspects, environmental procurement legislation. So my question is, how can this be changed? What is the reason behind that? What in terms of leadership is needed? What can we as public do in order to change this and have those 500 billion euros support the infrastructures of tomorrow that we need? This country would be a different place if that was happening.
Okay, so we have farmers, the future of the CAP, the debt brake, public procurement, and solar manufacturing in Europe and dependencies. Sven, you first.
Okay, so first thing I need to set straight. In the Green Deal negotiations, the Council, for the first time ever, Arne, you wouldn't have believed it, the Council was regularly more greener than the Parliament. And the main problem why the Parliament was not as green as the Council was because Ursula von der Leyen doesn't, for all her policies, have a majority in her own group. And the Bavarian, so the Bavarian leader of the EPP was her toughest enemy. So therefore, the old dichotomy, Parliament for environment and the nasty council has blocked it all. And that's you were indicating they are so prudent because there's no because there's no council support. No, the main problem is there's no Parliament support anymore. And that's why it's so important what's happening at the European Parliament elections. In the Council, there was on many files a greener position that until recently, I can give you the list, than from Parliament. So therefore, citizens have a choice whom they vote in the Parliament. So then second, the CAP reform. I have to say there's not yet a government position on it. So I'm not allowed to give you something detailed because there isn't. Then when it comes to the debt brake, so of course Germany puts a lot of public money into financing, in particular also the industrial dimension, but also heat and other areas. We have the Climate Transition Fund. The Climate Transition Fund is well resourced. It has received a certain hit, but still we are putting a lot of money in. And when it comes to public procurement, I can only say we are preparing a large public procurement reform. That's in my competence. I'm very optimistic that soon this will come out. You will see it will cut a lot of red tape and at the same time delivers better for the environment and social rights. And I'm very optimistic that this can be a positive project. This can also use the EU space left for large procurement decisions. Main decisions are European, and therefore public procurement is very high on the list of the changes we need to make in the common market. In the Letta report, this was highlighted. This receives, in principle, support by the German government.
Christian.
Okay, I could say something on the Arne for the European solar power ideas, and so for this opportunity, I always have a piece of polysilicon with me, so you can see that's the material of the dreams, because you can make two great things out of it. So it's hyper pure silicon, the element silicon, which is really abundant on this planet, mostly in the form of sand, so you don't find it in this form. You have to produce it, and it's an energy-intensive process. And it's super pure. It's the purest material on the planet. And you can make solar cells or semiconductor chips out of it. Now, in the semiconductor field, we actually have a market share of about 50% worldwide. So every second computer chip is made with our material. In the solar space, we are currently probably at around 5%. We have been at 20, some 15 years ago. And guess who took the share? Now, all of that business is now essentially in China, and we are the last man standing making the first step of the solar value chain. And yeah, I mean, we have been talking very much with BMW K also on this. Just, I think, last week we had interchange on that. It's a challenging situation. I think everybody agreed after the Russian attack on Ukraine that we need to become more resilient on energy forms, and also solar is a part of that, as 95% is done today in China. China is for us also a market because, again, because there's nobody left. So if you produce also polysilicon today in Germany or in the US as we do, China is an important market for us. Now, building up a new value chain, a total value chain in Germany or in Europe, I think is a good idea. I would never go as far as saying to become independent from the biggest market in China, because I think that wouldn't be also financially not wise. And we could utilize also what they do, and they have large scales, so it's a benefit. It makes the material cheaper, these scales. But having kind of a resilience of, let's say, kind of a 10-20% of your demand, I think that would be a good idea for resilience. And yeah, we are advocating on that. We are already here, so there's actually no lack of European production capacity. But what's missing today is the next steps in that value chain. Next steps is guys that make, large wafers out of it. And again, it's an energy-intensive process. And it's very difficult to find somebody who will do it within Europe. And therefore, again, I come back to my simple statement in the beginning. The equation is all about electricity. Once you can offer electricity, you will attract more industries and businesses, and then they do something. Now, if you go further in the value chain on the cells and on the modules, that's a different process. It's essentially not really energy intensive. It's more a complex manufacturing process. But I tell you, if you build up a value chain and you miss the second two steps, then it's not really resilient. I mean, then I would say just buy the stuff directly from China. It's probably cheaper than overall, but then you have no resilience. And I think, therefore, it's really coming back to a political decision. And also, it goes back to your question also, the public money that is spent. And that's also our ideas, saying, if you make a solar panels on a new building for the government, then you can ask as a government, we want at least 20%, 30% of the material produced fully in the EU, and we are willing to pay a higher price because manufacturing is somehow more expensive. So it's still going on, but to be honest, I think it's a difficult discussion, also within Europe, and especially if you talk about power pricing. And here again, coming to Europe, I appreciate your comments or what you said about the US, and I didn't say everything is easy in the US. I wouldn't go as far as you saying it is as complicated, it just looks different. We have some intrinsic issues, I think, in Europe because we are 27, 28 countries, yes. But for a business, you have to take a decision, and if it takes forever for taking a decision, and kind of the obscure, and let me make this comment as the last comment. Sometimes the obscure, from my point of view, discussions I had in Brussels were that people told me, okay, we want you to produce more of this stuff. Okay, you need cheap electricity, but that's a problem with the internal market. So I said, yeah, but what's the problem? We are for free competition within that market. And then I said, okay, but the problem is there's nobody left. It's only me. So if you give me at a power price for polysilicon, it won't harm anybody because there is nobody. And, that's kind of, and if then the answer is, well, we don't have any plan for this, maybe we need to have some competition for you. And I said, okay, interesting, but that's not actually what we're looking for. I don't mind competition, but it doesn't solve the problem. We have plans, we can invest, we have the money, we have great people, but if I build a new plant, and the first day I switch it on, I probably make a loss because the power price is too high.
Another time we will definitely have either DG Competition or DG Energy from the European Commission as the third member of the panel. Then it'll really run for longer. I'm going to take one more quick round of questions. Okay, the three fastest were here. In the sort of stripy sweater at the back. Actually, if you've put your hand up, keep your hand up so that the people with that's right. Great. Okay, please go ahead first.
Thank you. My name is Lucas. I work for a company consulting companies like yours on buying electricity. And when we do the calculations, it doesn't seem that the electricity price in Germany, even with all the renewables and the grid integration, is going to come down to levels that this Brückenstrompreis would assume for 2030. So my question is, what are other solutions beyond bringing down the electricity price to that level? Because, I mean, in the end, that would require subsidies until 2050.
Okay. Next question. Here we go. Yep.
Know me? Okay. Hi, Louis Brickman from CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project. Sven, at the beginning, you talked a lot about the need for private capital as a key way of financing the transition. We've talked a lot about public finance today. So I'm curious to hear from you what you see some of the key gaps remaining to mobilize the necessary private capital. And then maybe to you as well, Christian, do you experience a lack of sufficient private capital as a hindrance to your efforts? And what would be some of the biggest changes you would like to see to close those gaps?
Okay, and then we had this guy here, right in front of you. Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Martin Stavenhagen from PRI, Principles for Responsible Investment, an organization that helps big pension funds and other investors to integrate ESG into investment decisions. And my question very much relates to what CDP asked as well, my colleague from CDP, asking about the EU Sustainable Finance Framework, if the taxonomy and other instruments, sustainability reporting requirements and so on, are actually helpful for transition finance, and what might be done to make it even more helpful or to improve it going forward.
And is there a Hertie student in the room who would like to add one last question? Okay, young lady here. In the white jacket.
Hi, I'm Cheryl White, MPP student, about to finish my thesis specifically on energy topics and flexibility and all of that. So you talked a lot about both one market and also one energy price. And I would like to ask both of you to elaborate a little bit more on what that actually means for you. Does it mean having one energy price all over Europe? I don't think so, because that wouldn't really be economic feasible. So what does that mean? And also, we see price differences both north to south in Germany as well as in Europe, and also east to west. And we also see a lot of conservative or highly coal-based countries being opposed to a lot of what the Green Deal is about. So how do you see that topic moving forward in the next 4 years as well? Thank you.
Okay, so we have the electricity market. We have, do 27 countries wish to pull in the same direction, generally on the Green Deal, but perhaps also on the electricity market? We have the future of electricity prices, and essentially how ultimately we can bring down green electricity prices to a level where they enable everything else we need to build on that. We have questions about the role of private capital. Is there sufficient private capital? And last but absolutely not least, sustainable finance frameworks and the role that they play. Who would like to pick up first? Christian, perhaps.
Yeah, I could start maybe the question from Lucas on the where you said where do we end with the power pricing? Well, first of all, I think we need to make sure and we all talk at the end of the day about an all-in power price. I mean, I think that's the conclusion, because it doesn't help me that, the power is 4 cents, at the exchange, and then I have to add another 8 cents with some other stuff. So when we talk about a single number, we talk about all-in, including grid fees. So I think we need to look that, all these other components are getting really to a minimum. And I think if you talk about renewables, I think we also should make sure that, for example, if you go offshore, that you don't have auctions for these areas where the country earns billions and feels like happy, making a great deal, putting the money somewhere else. But at the end of the day, the company that produces the wind, the electricity with wind, puts that auction money, they put it at the table on the energy price. So I think we need to avoid this, and then I believe we can come into this area of 5 to 6 cents, definitely. And but the question with the industry power price was always not the absolute number. We introduced an absolute number to make it more tangible, because otherwise people talk about different things. But the main idea behind it was it needs to be competitive with other regions. So, and therefore it could also be a fluctuating price. But I honestly, I don't fear the let's say the competition on energy pricing with, let's say, Saudi Arabia. Everybody knows there's more sun than we have. But come on, I think the problem is not if you produce it for 2 cents or if you produce it for 4 cents. That's not the decisive factor. The decisive factor is really, is it 4 cents or is it 15 cents? So therefore, I'm still optimistic that with the renewables, we will have a power pricing that can bring us to a competitive scale. There was the last question on power market, one price. Well, my understanding was not one price for all of Europe, probably not. And you will definitely have these fluctuations over the day because of the renewables. And then it all depends on the grid interconnections. But I think the more grid interconnections you have, the more you can come to a more balanced pricing system. Today we have a production of silicon metal, which is the precursor of that stuff, also energy intensive. That's in northern Norway, that's in the NO3 region, which is not interlinked greatly to the other Norwegian regions, of course, which is great for us because the power price is cheap. Now, if you link this to the rest of Europe, what will happen is NO3 goes up, all the others go down. But I think that will be the future, that you have more interlinkage, and then everybody can utilize it depending on what are the peak pricing at the moment. And I think we haven't seen this so far to a large extent, but I'm super optimistic how that will be utilized. We also look at this, how we can steer our processes. So the polysilicon process is kind of 70% electrified. But typically we take, the same level 24/7. And we hate fluctuations on millisecond scale. But of course, we could go 20% down in consumption, which leads to 20% less product. So is that ultimately the great thing to do? Not yet, but I think you will see also in industry that more and more go into that direction to utilize the fluctuating power pricing. Sven, you to add on that?
Thanks for giving me the floor. This is so first, we delivered for industrial planning permissions in Net Zero Industry Act. We delivered in the Net Zero Industry Act with the resilience auctions exactly what you demanded, that there will be a markup on local production. And as you know, we didn't, unfortunately, in the Solar Pact, now won the same in German legislation, but we won it in EU legislation, and it will now be implemented. And that is the economic backbone of exactly what you were asking for, and these short maximum time span for new permits of industrial facilities in EU law for the first time is also exactly what you asked for. So I would say what you were demanding, we delivered already. Second, I didn't hear anyone speaking about one price, but we spoke about reducing the total cost by better interconnection. It doesn't change that there will be not one pricing zone. It will only better connect the different pricing zones. When it comes to guessing future prices, Lucas, don't get me wrong, but I won one good bottle of wine from the lead economist of the Chancery, Cookies, and one good bottle of wine from the lead economist of the finance ministry, not because I believe in the supremacy of green economists in the economic ministry, so myself, but because they got totally wrong to foresee the price of gas 1 year ahead. So I won it because I was much more optimistic on bringing down the gas. They believed we are too stupid in the economy ministry to manage energy prices and delivering, and we were much better. And therefore, I still wait for my good bottle of the finance ministry. I got it already from the Chancery. So therefore, I'm only deeply skeptical of people who claim they know prices in 2050. You have no clue. And therefore, I don't believe you. Not personally, but about the pricing. Therefore, I believe if we all massively invest in renewables, prices will come down. And if we finance the grid infrastructure intelligently, we will also avoid that this leads to a doubling again. Then when it comes to the question of the auctions, which you mentioned, I have to say that offshore wind does not set the price. So offshore wind is not setting the marginal price, and therefore the money we earned basically has not stolen any money from cheap renewables. It has also only made sure that a form of energy which is not crucial for setting the price in the merit order will also have to finance a part of the public bill which we have to finance. Then
short disagreement, Sven, on that.
Of course.
Because on the other hand, you ask us to make PPAs. So PPAs with wind farms are essentially getting more expensive because of auctions.
I agree. If there is a PPA model involved, it's true. But in the normal financing arrangement, this argument doesn't stand. Then mobilizing private capital. I would say, generally, if I speak to banks, they always tell me openly, look, Sven, we have no shortage of debt money. Really, there is not. So banks stand ready to finance. They are searching for profitable investment opportunities in comparison to the risk. Where we have a problem is in some parts of Europe, public financing. We spoke about this. And we have a problem with equity, in particular for startup and growth companies. And therefore, we need this capital markets union also for the innovation we need to deliver in Europe, which is fully consistent with the Green Deal ideas. And there we have a problem. I personally never believed that the taxonomy will in itself really help financing projects. I always regarded this as a sales argument for the taxonomy. Because perfect capital markets are not, if a business case is profitable, a perfect capital market will finance it, regardless how many taxonomies you put on it. But what it does, and that is really an important contribution, is it delivers data and forces companies to be transparent how green they are. So those companies which are greening will therefore, by customers, by the state, by in a reputation, will have a competitive edge. But for this you need comparable data. And the taxonomy and the respective financing rules help to develop that data. I admit that this argument, the taxonomy has often been sold as diverting capital flows, which I think from an economic perspective it could have never delivered. Soros, for instance, made that point very early on in the debate, and he was right. However, there is a value in it, and therefore it's good that companies and in particular finance institutions have to be transparent, which have how much environmental future risk, and that makes the capital market working better.
Sven, I appreciate your comment on the that you're not overexcited about taxonomy.
I'm rarely overexcited.
Yeah. But I have to say, I'm not excited about. I'm not at all excited about taxonomy, and I can tell you why. The idea, again, as many European ideas, the idea is good. The way it's done is bad. And I tell you, in our case, so in the chemical industry, and this stuff is not in the taxonomy. Mm-hmm. I'm the only one that makes this green stuff, that makes solar cells and computer chips in Europe, and it's not within the taxonomy. And we keep punching the guys and telling them there's something wrong. And the answer is, well, we are not there yet. We started with end consumer products. Yet I say, okay, then let us get rid of the stuff for us until you settle your case. Once you're done, implement it. And don't. So I have to report on it. I hired people to report on the stuff, and what comes out of it is we are negative. So I say, I think this is stupid. I mean, this is close to stupid. So therefore, your question was, how can taxonomy improve? I mean, either we get rid of it, which I think might be hard, or make it kind of feasible, or kind of that everybody has an advantage from it. Because today I only have work, I have no advantage, and I have to tell some investors, luckily not many, why we are not on the good side on taxonomy.
Let's be generous and say that the taxonomy is an example of learning by doing, as is much of the Green Deal. I want to thank very much our two fantastic panelists who have been quite excited in this conversation. I'm excited too, because what we've had here is a discussion which could have been about the political calendar and political personalities. Actually, it's been about green economy, green energy, engineering, finance. This is the big elements that are actually about whether we can turn nice targets on paper into a genuinely different economy that will deliver on climate security. And it's great that that's the hot topic, and it's great to see the audience as excited about that topic. Lots of strong views, lots of appetite for the next steps here. Thank you very, very much. Big round of applause for our panelists.